Louisville is a city known for many things: world-class bourbon, historic horse racing, one-of-a-kind restaurants. But underneath the veneer of Southern hospitality lies many dark and twisted stories. From the darkest depths of the Ohio to the highest peaks of the Knobs. From New Albany to Newburgh, from Portland to the Highlands. J-Town, Smoketown, Butchertown, and everywhere else under the shadows of the Twin Spires. These are Louisville True Crimes. Welcome to this week's episode. I'm your host, Adam C. Thomas, and this week we're going to talk about a more recent case, one that happened in 2012. This case rocked old Louisville as well as myself due to the sheer brutality of the crimes. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Jeffrey Mundt was a faculty member at Northwestern University in Chicago who abruptly moved to Louisville in 2007 to live with his boyfriend, Joseph Banis. His move was punctuated by the fact that Mundt and Banis both made no qualms about vocalizing their fetishes. They both, quote, nursed a voracious appetite for violent sex and crystal meth. After moving into a house on South 4th Street and living in the old Louisville neighborhood for a few years, Mundt and Banis met a man named Jamie Carroll who could supply them with both things they so desperately required. In December of 2009, Carroll came by with a Christmas present of another kind. He brought methamphetamine, and after the three smoked what he had brought, Mundt, Banis, and Carroll engaged in sexual activity together. Once all their devious appetites had been sated, Mundt and Banis asked Carroll if he would go get some more meth. Carroll agreed, gathered himself, and left to retrieve a new stash of drugs. As soon as Carroll was gone, Mundt and Banis set a devious plan into motion. Mundt knew that Carroll was a drifter and told Banis no one would miss him. Banis only wanted to rob the guy, but Mundt had much darker intentions. The two argued over whether to murder or just rob Carroll, and soon enough he had returned with the meth. The three continued to smoke and have sex through the cold December night. Afterwards, Mundt and Banis stood up, and while it is unclear who, at this point one of the two shot Jamie Carroll. The gunshot wasn't enough, though. Someone grabbed a knife, determined to finish him off. After the deed was done, the two began to panic. They dragged Carroll's body to the basement, where Mundt had a 50-gallon plastic tote sitting empty, presumably for a more appropriate purpose. In the adrenal rushes of a methamphetamine binge, they began to dig a hole. It didn't have to be deep. Just deep enough to cover the tote. But how would they get his body in the tote? He wouldn't fit as he was, so something had to be done. One of the two noticed a sledgehammer sitting against a wall in the darkened room. They took it and set about the grisly job of folding Carroll's body up like a piece of clothing being packed away for a trip. Hammering at his knees, folding up the body and other joints to fit the now stiffening body into the undersized tote. And the body packed into the tote. They covered what remained of Jamie Carroll in lime, filled the tote with foam sealant also found amongst the other household tools. All that was left to do was to try and forget. 4 months passed, and the pair had traveled to Chicago to attend a party at the Hyatt Regency. Mundt attempted to slide past the doorman by handing him a, quote, wet $100 bill. This aroused the doorman's suspicion, at which point he called the police. After verifying that the bill was counterfeit, Mundt and Banis were both arrested and searched. Police searching their vehicle found over $55,000 in counterfeit cash, drugs believed to be GHB, and the sledgehammer the two had used to brutally dismember Carroll's body. Police were unaware the two had hidden a body under their home at this point. Both men posted bail shortly after they were arrested and beat a hasty retreat back to Louisville. Summer heat, with its ability to make anyone crazy, treated the two no differently. Mundt and Banis had been doing drugs once again, and things started to get out of control. Banis started chasing Mundt through the old Victorian home, where Mundt ran into the bathroom and called the police. On the phone, in hysterics, Mundt told the dispatcher what was happening, and units were on the way immediately. Police arrived. The first thing police do when arriving on the scene of a domestic abuse situation is to separate all the involved parties in an attempt to get the stories from each individually. This proved to be the undoing of both Joseph Banis and Jeffrey Mundt. As soon as the police arrived, Banis tried to flee the scene but was apprehended. Mundt was interrogated in front of the property. As questioning began, Mundt explained his side of the story. He thought it wise to roll on his lover and told the police there was a body in the basement. Banis, around back of the house, also being interrogated, thought the same. He told police during questioning that there was a body in the basement and Mundt was the murderer. Banis provided a map of the house. After each sang on the other, police followed the map and Mundt's description and indeed located the tote containing Carol's body. Both men were arrested and the tote was taken to the county medical examiner to determine if it was, or was not, Jamie Carroll. The examiner studied the body and removed the foam sealant Mundt had sprayed inside the container to mask the smell. He examined the victim's corpse and discovered a gunshot as well as the multiple fatal knife wounds. "5 days after the initial call for domestic violence, both men were indicted on a slew of charges related to the murder, including complicity to murder and tampering with evidence. The investigators thought it wise to try the two men separately. Both men maintained innocence in the murder of Jamie Carroll, implicating the other as the perpetrator of the crime. The separate trials began in winter 2012, carrying over into the spring. In March, Mundt had begun and continued to testify against Banis. Mundt was questioned about his previous drug use, the defense attempting to paint an accurate, if not unflattering, picture of Mundt's habit. He told the defense he was not a drug user. When pressed further about his relationship with Carroll, he backed his story up to state he did not do drugs, quote, as he did with Banis. Mundt painted an equally unflattering picture of Banis as a violent abuser. He claimed Banis would regularly fly off the handle into blind rages, threatening Mundt and everything he loved with violence if Mundt had taken the information of the murder to the police. Meanwhile, simultaneously, Banis was testifying the same things about Mundt, nearly down to the exact same letter, except with himself as the victim and Mundt as the perpetrator of the crime. The trial dragged on well into the late spring of 2013, and Detective John Lesher was called to provide his testimony in the incident. While on the stand, Lesher told the court that he did not believe Banis's wild accusations. He believed Banis was making nonsense claims to extend the time of questioning and prolong the hearings. Some claims Banis made to the court included a statement that Mundt told Banis he would always frame him for the murder. a claim for which there was no evidence. Quite to the contrary, evidence was submitted in Banis' trial in the form of a video in which Banis, distraught and beleaguered, told detectives he had murdered someone, as well as he was holding Mundt hostage in his old Louisville home. Banis also admitted to his suicidal ideations, wrought with guilt. Both trials carried on expeditiously, culminating in sentencing for both as summer approached. In June 2013, Joseph Banis was convicted of the murder of Jamie Carroll and sentenced to life in prison. He did not take the sentence well. After the verdict was read, Banis made a plea to the court in which he maintained his innocence in the crime, holding to his claim that Mundt was a master manipulator and Banis was merely a pawn. He paraded Mundt's ability to maintain a veneer of goodness, behind which he hid a vicious, cold-blooded psychopath. Banis pled for forgiveness from Carroll's family, who were present at the trial. Banis was sentenced to life in prison, narrowly avoiding the death penalty from his testimony against Mundt. He is currently still imprisoned at Little Sandy Correction Complex in eastern Kentucky. Mundt was sentenced to 8 years but released to supervised probation as he had been incarcerated during the trial and was allowed probation due to time served. He was acquitted on the murder charge, however was found guilty of robbery and tampering with evidence. He was remanded to a halfway house upon release from prison. After the trial ended, the home in which the crime occurred was purchased by an anonymous family, entirely remodeled, and the basement in which Carroll's body was buried was cleansed spiritually. The family who purchased the home stated they wanted to give the home a clean slate. Thanks for listening to the show. The show is produced, written, and hosted by me, Adam C. Thomas. Story and script editing is provided by Steph Parks. The show is engineered and recorded with special thanks to Matthew Davis with Hipfire Media and is edited by Tim Miller from Apparatus Sound. Don't forget to follow us across the social media landscape. We're on Facebook as the Louisville True Crimes Podcast, on Instagram at LTCPod, and on Patreon at www.patreon.com/LouisvilleTrueCrimes, or send us an email at LouisvilleTrueCrimes@gmail.com. Or you can always visit my website at www.adamcthomas.com. Another way you can help us tremendously is by going to iTunes and leaving us a rating and review, which helps us more than anything. The goal of all growing podcasts is to get as much steam behind them as possible through good ratings and reviews to help them rise through the ranks quickly. It costs you nothing but a moment of your time, and it helps us out tremendously. So if you like the show, head over there and help us out that way. And as always, we'll see you next time with more Louisville True Crimes.